All set, okay. Select Board, ready to go? Okay, then I will call the May 1st, 2017 Select Board meeting to order and invite you to join me in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Select Board meeting and just remind you, if you have a cell phone, if you could put it to buzz or silence or something, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so the first item, or the next item, is agenda additions and changes. Pat.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, the first item of business is a flyer regarding the Essex Center Master Plan redo. The first one was in 1991, and we're starting our next one this current year. I don't know if there was a flyer that went out before this one, but there is a new location from whatever correspondence did go out. The new location is at the Atrium at the Essex. I think there was some talk about perhaps being at the movie theater, but that's not going to happen.
Okay, and it's on May 20th?
Saturday, May 20th.
Okay.
Come one, come all. There's a misspelling on 5B on the agenda. McGillicuddy's, I didn't think it was worth the paper or the work for a new agenda. Just calling it to your attention. And then lastly, 6A can be deleted. It's not going to be discussed tonight, and it's not going to be part of the consent agenda tonight.
4B.
4B. 4B is also not going to be on the agenda tonight. The matter was managed this weekend. So the board does not have to take care of that.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay,
Thank you.
And on our agenda at 7:45, we have that presentation from Sarah Reeves from CSWD. And I know she's on a tight schedule. She's got a number of these things tonight. So if we can be flexible as it comes to 7:45, if we can table whatever it is we have going there and get on that, would that be okay? Okay, great. All right, so then I need a motion to approve the amended agenda with the additions and changes that
So
we just
moved.
talked about. Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second? Thank you, Sue. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor of the agenda change signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you all. Okay, we're going to go on to public to be heard. It's a time for the public to speak to the Select Board on topics that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here tonight who would like to speak to the Select Board? I actually saw Barbara's hand go up first, and then I'll get to you. Okay.
process of hiring a new manager play out. Continue to look at those consolidation efforts that we've undertaken and actually look at them in an in-depth way to see whether they are really doing what they're supposed to do and in a fair way. Because again, equity was talked about at the meeting. I view equity somewhat differently than I think the trustees do. Again, it may be because I live outside of the village and they live inside the village. But again, I think the whole issue of governance and equity are the crux of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, and Mark.
Matt Harding.
Matt.
I'm just here to talk about incident involving the village snowplow and my dealings with Vermont leagues and cities and towns. February 10th, the town plow went by, dump body all the way up, clipping the wires to my house, and it resulting ripping the siding down and damaging the vehicle in the yard. It's been over 60 days with Vermont leagues of cities and towns with lack of emails being responded to, that phone calls not being returned. And I provided a lot of my neighbor's security cam video, shows the dump truck with it all the way up and their responses. It's a common practice to drive with the plow for the body up. And I'm like, yes, it is, but not all the way up, and not all the way up to dump the whole load of sand in the road. And so basically, I've got $3,000 worth of damage to the car and significant damage to the siding of the house. It's $7,000 to the side that got damaged, and then they say they can't match the siding, so it's an additional $24,000 to do the whole house. And so their position is that Vermont League of Cities and Towns says, well, we'll pay for half the damage as goodwill, but you're on your own. Why don't you go after Comcast Cable? I'm like, well, there's, what did Comcast Cable do other than put the cable to the house? And I've got pictures and stuff like that, but we probably don't have enough time to look at all of them, but they're available. I can email them to anyone who'd like to see them.
Okay, so Matt, this happened in the village?
Correct.
Okay, so I just want to direct the question to Pat or maybe to Dennis. Can you address that? Is he at the right place for this?
This is not the right place. No, you were at the right place when you sent your information to Vermont League of Cities and Towns, who's the carrier for your claim. And it sounds like the claim's been adjudicated and you're not happy with it.
Well, it's been strung out and, they've been...
But do you have something in writing that says they'll pay for half the damage?
They did say that, yes.
They do it in writing?
They did write a letter.
Well, if you don't like, and this sounds awfully harsh, but if you don't like what they said, you could maybe appeal the decision of the staff to the board. But I would call the league and find out what that process is. This board has nothing to say about it, nothing to do about it. The Board of Trustees has nothing to say about it, nothing to do about it. It's all a matter of the insurance, unfortunately. I'm a little unclear as to why they mentioned, who was the carrier? Comcast. Maybe Comcast didn't string the wire to the right height, or maybe there's something that the people in the league found out and are suggesting that you find out as well, but they feel might not be appropriate for them to say. But
and my point is, we're spending a lot of money on our premiums for that insurance company, and they've been dragging their feet and less than, response or any phone call or anything else to do. So that's...
they did respond. And
Mr. Chairman.
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
After a significant amount of time.
Mike, did you want to comment?
Have you gotten a check from the insurance company, sir?
No.
After 60 days?
Correct.
Really? And was it Comcast's cable that came down by the truck, or was it a power cable or a telephone?
It was phone and cable.
Okay. 60 days with no check? That's not right.
Okay. So at this point, Pat, there's nothing that neither the trustees nor the select board
No.
can do because it's with the VLCT insurance?
Yeah. I'll take a look.
Okay, sorry about
Yep.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, and I think, Rich, did you have you could state your name just for the record, we know who you are.
So I understand you set aside $30,000 for a search committee to look for a new path. And I've been through a process twice, finding an executive director. I've been on a board, international membership organization. So I took it upon myself to call the last firm that we worked with, since he delivered an excellent candidate. And that person, Chris, followed through on all the things that we needed him to do in this organization. So I asked him a number of questions about the situation facing the town, potential merger and a potential joint town manager, and he told me a couple of things that I want to tell you tonight. One is he felt that 10 people were too many to work with a search committee. You are hiring a search committee, am I
That's,
correct in
yeah,
that assumption?
that's what the money was set aside for, to have professional help for a search.
Okay, and you're gonna spend it.
That's currently the plan. And it's money from the town and also from the village being pooled.
Okay, so from the situation, he offered up a couple of things. One was to have an even-numbered person committee to work with the search firm. And he suggested an even number because if it came down to, say it was 5 people, 2 say no, 2 say yes, then it's really up to 1 person. And it should eventually be an unanimous vote anyways, but it shouldn't be left up to 1 person's responsibility to make that kind of decision. So he suggested either 6 or 8 people, a couple from this board, a couple from the trustees, and a couple of citizens who have been through the process before, understand this kind of a situation. So either 6 or 8 people. And that committee would draw up, as the committee from my board did, what we're looking for, what we liked about the previous executive director, what we didn't like, what we felt were lacking. And this was without her, it just happened to be a woman. The first time was a man, so it was both. Wasn't involved in that process. And that was a confidential document between the committee and the search team, the search firm. And that went back and forth because the search firm had a lot of experience with this kind of a process. To clarify what we're looking for, not only, because what he said, a lot of people think about where are we, where have we been, when the real job is where are we going, and where do we see ourselves, how long would you like this person to be on board, and Pat's been here, how long?
Almost 27 years.
Long time. So if we have the next person come in for 25 years, the world is a very different place in 2040, is that right? Than it is now. And so that's where the committee should be looking. It was, for the record, Leonard Pfeiffer and Company, and he gave me a flyer that I'm going to hand out that talks about his search process. The first page is an overview, and the next 3 pages are details of it all. He didn't request this, but I am. Just keep this among yourselves and not publish it, so that you can have some information to work with when you're looking for a search committee.
It's public record if you give it to us. It'll
Okay,
be out
so
in the
it is.
public
He
domain.
didn't say it couldn't be.
Okay.
It was
Just
fine.
wanted to let you know that.
He did give me something that he didn't want public, so I.
Yeah, then don't do that, yeah.
Okay, so this is fine. It's a discussion of how they go about
Okay, great.
doing this.
Thank you.
So just give it to Sarah.
Yeah, give it to Sarah, and we'll give it. We have work to do to talk about how we're going to select a group, and we'll use that as we'll give it some due consideration as part of the process.
So
So,
I've been through this twice. It was an international organization, so we had a search
Okay. Thank you for doing that, Rich. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Okay, anybody else wishing to speak during public to be heard? Okay, hearing none, then we're going to move on to our first item of business, because we're going to skip the Board of Health piece. And we have second-class liquor license renewals before us. Any comments on the Valley Vape Company LLC application from the board? Any concerns? Sue?
Just my typical, it mentions the town of Essex Junction. I think we should either say town of Essex or village of Essex Junction.
And where in here again? Could you point to that?
Right, the description of premises,
Okay.
the last 5 words.
Okay. So Doug, is that something for future ones? Maybe we can correct that?
I guess
Try
I
it
didn't
again?
hear that we didn't pass that.
Okay, and this is the only one we have. If there's no other concerns or questions, then I would entertain a motion here to approve the second-class liquor license for Valley Vape LLC.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mike, do I have a second on that?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on approving the second-class liquor license for Valley Vape LLC? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that one passes 5-0. Thank you all. Going to go on to item 5B, which is the outside consumption permit for Brown Lab Pub Company doing business as McGillicuddy's Five Corners. Now, we approved already the first-class liquor license, but the outside permit, I think, the sketch was a little confusing, so they redid it here. Any questions or concerns about the application for the outdoor permit?
I actually still find the sketch a little confusing, so.
Sketch a little sketchy?
I couldn't tell from this, are they at all impeding the use of the sidewalk?
No, there will still be a traveled section of the sidewalk outside of the section that they have
Does it
fenced off.
jut into the sidewalk at all?
Well, I believe that's an extra wide sidewalk area there, and in part was to accommodate that.
Right, that was part of their application, I think, was planning to do this outdoor
I
seating.
think so, yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? Do you know what time, it says outdoor consumption time period from 9 to midnight. Is that the typical time that we allow outdoor consumption? Because there's apartments right there?
I did not have a chance to check on that today. I think basically he was giving himself the wide parameters that he would want to use. We can certainly speak with Mr. Nelson and, make sure that he's not too late. There is noise ordinances in the village that he'll have
Okay.
to comply with.
Okay, so that's covered in the ordinances in the village anyway, so, okay. All right, any other comments, concerns about this? Okay, I would entertain a motion for this one.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, go for it.
I'll make a motion that the select board approve the outside consumption permit for McGillicuddy's Five Corners, or I guess Brown Lab Pub Company acting as McGillicuddy's Five Corners.
Okay, doing business as, thank you, Sue. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Thank you, Irene. Okay, any further discussion on the outdoor consumption permit for McGillicuddy's? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, that one passes 5-0. Thank you all. Okay, we're moving right along then. We're going to do, go up to 5C, which is the Chittenden County Regional Stormwater Changes. And tonight we have Annie Costandi and Dennis Lutz. Welcome both.
I'll sit.
So who wants to take us through this?
Annie does.
Oh, of course. She's our specialist there.
Yeah.
Okay, Annie.
So the issue is whether to authorize staff to sign the Chittenden County MS4 Stormwater Program Agreement effective July 1st, 2017. Under the state stormwater permit, the town complies with minimum measure 1 public education through the regional stormwater education program and minimum measure 2 public participation through the Chittenden County Stream Team. The town, along with other MS4 communities, contracts with the Regional Planning Commission to administer these programs through an MOU that was due to expire at the end of last fiscal year. At the same time, Bill H-249, an act relating to intermunicipal services, which allows municipalities to contract with the regional planning commissions for the provision of services, was signed and going to be in effect on July 1st, 2016. So RCEP and the Chittenden County Stream Team decided to extend the previous MOU for 1 year to allow for the Regional Planning Commission to amend their bylaws before entering into another extended MOU for the same services. On April 19th, the Regional Planning Commission approved their bylaws, and it requires that each municipal legislative body that wants to enter into a contract with the Regional Planning Commission has to approve that contract. The Stream Team decided to merge their services under one brand and created a single MOU, which was provided to the Select Board for your review. And it references the bylaws. Bill Ellis, the town's attorney, reviewed and approved the MOU from a legal standpoint. And with Select Board approval, Public Works recommends that the Select Board authorize Dennis Letts, the Public Works Director, to sign the revised Chittenden County MS4 Stormwater Program Agreement on behalf of the town.
Okay, very clear. Thank you, Annie.
Yep.
Questions from the board for Annie about this? All right.
I have a question in section 5A at the bottom of page 1. I think there's a word missing. The second sentence says, another MS4 may request to join this agreement. I don't think you mean another separate sewer storm system, but that you mean another permittee may request to join this agreement. So maybe the word permittee needs to be in there. Does that make sense? It just didn't read correctly to me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, okay.
Yep.
So with that change, I'd recommend signing it.
Okay. This is a draft MOU, so I will,
Okay.
this was the final draft MOU, so I'll
Till I got to it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll let the Regional Planning
Thank you.
Commission know.
Okay, so that's 5A, the second line down towards the
Yes.
end there.
Yes.
So we say another MS4
Permittee.
permittee
Yes.
may request. Okay, very good. All right, anything else on this? Any other questions? Seems pretty straightforward. Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve it.
I move, Mr. Chairman, that the Select Board authorize the Public Works Director to sign the revised Chittenden County MS4 Stormwater Program Agreement when completed.
Thank you, Mike. Do I have a second on that? Okay, thank you, Sue. Any further discussion on approving this MS4 Stormwater Program Agreement? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, another one, 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dennis. Okay, we're gonna keep Dennis here. And next item is 5D, and that's intermunicipal sewer agreement. Dennis, can you bring us up to speed on this one?
Yeah, as you know, the board met earlier and in previous meetings and agreed approved the sewer and water connections under our intermunicipal agreement with the village. It goes back to when the treatment plant was first built back in the 80s. So the agreement that was set up then stated that if a party outside the boundary, say in the town, wanted to connect into sewers within the village, that had to go through the select board. It couldn't be private developer directly with the village. We came to the select board approved that and allowed it to go forward. The next step was to go to the village, for the village to review that, review the plans, review all the pieces that went with that, to approve that particular action. When that occurred, there appeared to be, at least on the part of the village attorney, an outstanding question or issue, and it came about by virtue of, in a normal circumstance, it would be that the town would have a parcel with allocation on that parcel that belonged to the town that would then cross the boundary and go into the village. And this one was a little bit different. There's a very long history. I did not give that to you. This is the history that goes a long, long way back, where the village and the town, it's in the first part of this in 1991, agreed to allow some property transfers to occur with respect to wetlands and other issues that at least the present party was really not aware of in terms of what went on, but irrespective of that, the approval was given to allow the connection to be made. But the issue is one of, this is now a situation where the village provided the capacity for the applicant, not the town. And the village attorney was uncomfortable with that falling directly under that intermunicipal agreement, which is a lot more specific about who gives allocations. So when it came to the issue with the trustees, they were okay. Again, their engineers reviewed the plans. They're in the process of having the developer's engineer make changes to those plans, like we went through the same process. Ultimately, it will go back, if all gets approved, it'll go back to the Planning Commission for their approval of the project. But at least the sewer and water issues hopefully will be resolved. And what the village wanted to have done through their attorney, it was actually the village attorney that wanted it done, was a specific agreement on this situation to cover the history of what occurred, the request that came across the boundary, the fact that there was an intermunicipal agreement in place, but the allocation was actually provided by the village. And then it called out what had to be done on the part of the applicant, the developer, to basically obtain town and village approval. We have completed our part. Like I said, other than the Planning Commission doing their thing on the project, we've completed our review of the sewer and water plans. Champlain Water District has completed its review of the sewer and water plans, so those aren't issues. The issue is the village now has to do it, and their feeling was that it should be put into a separate intermunicipal agreement to cover this specific situation, so there was no cloudy issues surrounding how this came about, the background on it, what was done, and the final actions that were taken or had to be taken. And if you read through the short memo, there are a series of things that the applicant has to do to satisfy the intermunicipal portion of this, which we understand anyway, in terms of a meter vault for the water and a bunch of other stuff that goes along with it. But it's also in here, paragraph 3 is pretty specific, and it says, this agreement does not constitute approval for any development, road construction, or connection. Any further approvals beyond this request for a water and sewer connection that crosses the boundary between the town and the village are beyond the scope of this agreement. They wanted it, and I agree with them, specific to this situation. There is one other property over there that, known as the McEwen property, that there was some cross-boundary given allocation. There's a couple houses connected. It goes back to that same vintage. I think at some point in time, if that were ever to be fully exercised, there could be another agreement that had to be written. I do not believe that it's in either the village or the town's interest to have a broad-based agreement. I think that everyone realizes, having gone through this once,
One that covers both, you mean?
one that covers whatever might occur in the future. I think that both parties, and I say the select board and the trustees, I think have learned this may not be best public policy in terms of providing allocation across boundaries. I'm hoping it's dead for the future, that it doesn't occur again. I would hate to have a broad-based policy that allows that, because that would allow growth to occur in portions of the town where the town hasn't designated by the town plan. There ought to be growth, to be quite honest. In this case, the zoning is different, so it's possible. But I think that you get down a very slippery slope. I think what we recognize is this was done. It's fact. I think if it went to court, the applicant, the developer, would win pretty clearly based upon all the background that went with it. So I think the proper thing to do at this point is to essentially approve the agreement on the part of the select board. The trustees have already approved the agreement at a prior meeting. And this would then set the stage, and then I believe the authorization is for the chair to sign it. So it wouldn't require a signature necessarily tonight, but both chairs should sign the agreement to make it official and then it would be filed in the land records, and hopefully, this is history.
But there could be one more, though, right?
There could possibly be one more at some future date, but this also, I think, sets the ground rules for that. Since there was prior agreements on that property, it would follow the same format, but it doesn't open the door to allow this as a common occurrence across all properties that are on the boundary between the town and the village. I honestly think that would be a mistake.
And the select board had discussed that at a
Right.
prior meeting, that concern, yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Okay, questions, concerns, comments for Dennis? Anybody? Sue?
It may be in here, I didn't see it, but the maintenance of the connection?
When, this one's pretty clear in the sense that, let's take water first. There's a CWD, Champlain Water District meter vault that's at various points on our boundary where water, the water we get from Champlain Water District goes, in a lot of cases, through the village and then goes into the town. And it does it throughout the district, from town to town. At those boundaries, there's a meter vault. Beyond that meter vault, it's our responsibility, which would be in the town, and we accept that responsibility when if the planning commission approves the project, it becomes our water system. And then we would maintain that as any other water system. On the village side of that meter vault, that's the village's responsibility. The meter vault, CWD takes care of, to make sure that the accounting is correct between who's using water in the village and who's using water in the town. On sewer, our intent is to have a monitoring manhole put in that we can monitor the flow. It doesn't have to be there all the time. Relatively few houses, we've done a lot of this where you do a pretty good estimate of what the flow is. You check it with the meter periodically to make sure that there's not crazy infiltration or something going on. But that becomes the metered record for flow across boundary. At that boundary, at that meter vault, the village side, the village maintains. On the other side, the plan right now is the Developers Association would maintain as part of a sewer system. And that was what the board heard at the last meeting, and when you decided that was the way it would be set up. We would still inspect all the systems, check them to make sure they're put in correctly. They'd have to pass all the required tests and everything else, but ultimately that would be the methodology for who's going to maintain the systems.
So is that documented, captured somewhere else?
It's pretty clear at the boundary. That's where that maintenance stops. I mean, I don't think it's spelled out in the agreement. I don't think it has to be, because it's pretty clear. That's why those fixtures are there, to establish that boundary.
Okay, other questions? Irene?
On 1A, there's a question that says, this is the second page. It says, has the consolidation effort been successful / partially successful, comma, or unsuccessful?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'll wait with that.
Okay.
Any other questions on the intermunicipal agreement?
No.
Okay. None? Okay. Then I would entertain a motion here. Mike?
I move, Mr. Chairman, that the Select Board sign the intermunicipal agreement regarding the sewer and water connections across the town and village boundary with respect to the proposed development on the Colvord property.
Thank you, Mike. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Thank you, Irene. Okay, any further discussion on the intermunicipal agreement? Yeah,
Question,
not
do
too
we
late.
need to stipulate that the chair signs it? Or is
Probably
it
be
as-
better if you authorize the chair to execute the agreement.
So I guess I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to say that to include a phrase saying that, or maybe alter the words to say recommended that the select board authorize the chair to sign.
Okay. Mike, you okay with that?
Sure.
Irene, are you okay with that?
I think it's understood since that's part of the agreement, but I'll agree with that anyway.
Okay.
To be redundant, sure.
Okay, good. All right, any further discussion on that approving the intermunicipal agreement to have the chair, have me sign it? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. So we're getting close to the time here. Why don't we start on 5E, which is the Public Works and Stormwater Consolidation Review. So, Dennis.
I'll start, and if the guest comes in, I will stop and
Table
go
it.
from there. I've talked about this off and on for probably the last year and haven't provided either board with any information on it, so I thought it was about time that I did what I said I was going to do and give you the memo. When the intermunicipal agreements were set up for consolidation of stormwater and public works, there were two agreements, MOUs, that were signed. The stormwater one is pretty definite, but there's nothing in there about evaluation of the process or a time frame. So that has kind of a non-end date to it, if you will, and we're continuing to work under that agreement, and there are no issues with that at all. So there's no review process other than if either board wants to create a review process of how that's working. But according to the MOU, that wasn't required. In the highway agreement, there was a paragraph that dealt with, in Section 8, a review of the shared public works operations. And it put some things in there and left some things out. It put in a timetable for the review, which is this coming year, established a committee. It was a committee of 5, 2 trustees, 2 select board members, and another party. Probably the boards could change that if they wanted an even number. I don't know. That's up to you guys. But the whole intent was to have a review of the process. And so the next question was, and we wanted the timetable set up so that decisions could be made as early as possible regarding the next budget year. Where are we going, quite honestly? And so there's really one of 3 options that I see. 1, a continuation of the present MOU, extended on out. A continuation of the consolidation with modifications, meaning do more or do less. And then the third option would be to stop it. Don't just take it back to where it was. Originally, when I presented the whole process in the beginning and we talked about it, I thought that there was a fairly good public works management practices manual, and I've given you a couple of excerpts out of that here, pretty detailed. And when I started to think about that, I didn't believe it was applicable at this point in time because we really aren't fully consolidated. We've kind of made some initial steps towards that, but it's hard to evaluate practices when we haven't put those practices in place for both organizations. We've done some, they've done some, but we haven't established a common groundwork for all those practices. So to evaluate it that way is, in my view, at this point, premature and probably meaningless. It'd be nice to do, it would give you some great information, but it might be used as good background material for if there's a question about, well, what are you doing, or why aren't you doing this? Maybe that becomes a good resource. But that's different than using that as a guide to say, checking off, did they do this, did they do that? And I also think it's important that everyone understand this hasn't been a full consolidation, and I wanted to quote this, if nothing else, for the TV and the records. Out of that memo, it says, the Town Public Works Department will advise the municipal manager and make recommendations with respect to public works-related operations in the village, but shall have no direct management functions within the village unless it is determined on the basis of the integration study and agreed upon by both municipalities that the management and supervision functions will change as a result of the study findings in years 2 and 3. We never did that. So we've had a fairly loose arrangement as far as managing public works in the village. I think we've made some good success, we've done some good things, but it's been a loose arrangement. And I want to be honest about that. So there was no action taken when we provided the integration study. So the question then is, what should the evaluation contain? That's really what it comes down to. And so I've given some guidelines, and these are my thoughts. I've run them by Ricky in the village, I've run them by Aaron, I've run them by other staff, just to get their thoughts. But the first question, I think, is a historical question, and to me, is probably not worth a whole lot of value, but we ought to do it. And my thought process was that I would provide all the background information that the committee would need. I would not be a part of the evaluation process. I would be called upon if people wanted me there to answer a question, but I don't want to be a part of it. So these are the questions for whether we've been successful partially successful or unsuccessful. Maybe that's what Irene was mentioning before. And just in terms of a judgment. Integrating the village highway budget into the town's general fund budget. I mean, those are things we said in the MOU we were going to do. Providing the component elements of an integration study as outlined in Section 6. We said we're going to do that. We did that. I can provide copies of that. Reducing costs where such reductions are quantifiable. Again, we said we're going to do that. I can provide that. Providing management or engineering assistance as needed or requested. I think everybody's been aware of kind of the things we've done, but we can provide a list of where we've done that so that that's very clear. Coordinating activities for mutual support. Sometimes that's not so clear because a lot of that stuff goes on a daily basis back and forth. You may not even be aware of that. Ought to be brought out on the table so everybody knows the kind of stuff we've done kind of behind the scenes. Developing procedures and implementing tools for infrastructure management and operations. We have an operations plan, paver program we're working on, the GIS stuff, the SigClick Fix stuff. Those are all part of that. So, you know, those are all things we can document. Providing timely and quality public works services to residents, businesses in the town and the village. We didn't do a pre-survey. I don't know if a post-survey would be any good. We haven't gotten people screaming and saying our service is terrible, either in the village or the town. I mean, there are exceptions, but we haven't had this wholesale uproar saying things have totally fallen apart. And then maybe any other areas that I didn't think about in terms of that list of what we've done. So that's kind of the history that can be provided, documents, there it is. Facts, if you will, or to the degree we can do facts. The seventh one is pretty hard. And then the second piece of that, if aspects of the current consolidation process have been only partially successful or unsuccessful, what factors contribute to this and what needs to be changed? That could be internal. We're not working well enough together. Could be external. Could be the boards. Could be the town manager. Could be Doug. I mean, I don't know, but I'm saying what things have worked or not worked that we need to kind of, where we are right now. That's kind of the second piece. Separate from the facts, that's kind of a value judgment. And then the third one is the one where I think all the effort ought to be concentrated. And that's if the process is to continue, what changes need to be made going forward? And I would suggest the following. Should the process be defined via revised or new MOU with a set time frame? Should the process be solidified in terms of actual structural changes to both organizations? In effect, should this be a temporary consolidation under revised or new MOU, or do you want to make this some kind of a permanent organizational change? I think it's time to at least raise that question. Mm-hmm. What areas should be considered for further consolidation? And public works only. I didn't get into anybody else. Try to stay away from that one with as large a 10-foot pole as I could find. Management of water and sanitation departments. Pat and I have talked about this. We've got some memo that we've talked about that at some point we may want to consider talking about this. This isn't rates. The rates are very much different. But it's very hard to manage a public works entity if you're only dealing with streets and you're not dealing with what's under the streets. So that's a piece. Capital accounts. We have a totally different system in the village we do in the town on capital accounts. How we pay for them, how we set them up, how we manage them. Do we want to open that can and get into it, or don't we? And that's not my decision. That's a policy decision on the part of the boards. We don't have a centralized rolling stock fund. And I'll be done in about 2 seconds, so I'll give it. We don't have a centralized rolling fund. The village has one, we have one. Should we combine those? That might be very easy to do, but then how do you calculate the cost? How do you pay for it? Creation of a joint public works coordinating committee working with the public works director and municipal manager, I should have been, to develop recommendations on road paving, utility replacement, infrastructure, capital planning, and the like. The reason I say that is if at some point there's a decision made to solidify this public works organization, you don't want a public works organization, as I mentioned in the memo when we talked about municipal managers working for two bosses. It ain't gonna work. Understood. And so one of the ways to make it work and to help out is to have a capital or a public works committee. I don't like working that way. I much like working independently, but I think for the future, That's the way you ensure that if projects come up in the village, projects come up in the town, and you're funding them out of one source, what gets built first, what gets built second, what gets budgeted for, what gets bonded for. It's that next step to a more complete consolidation. It may be a place that the boards don't want to go yet, and that's fine, but to me, in the context of public works, it's hard to plan 3 to 5 years out what we're doing if we don't have a feel for where we're going to be in 3 or 5 years. And as you know, in 3 or 5 years, you'll have a different public works director and a different manager and a different finance director. So this all figures into that, trying to figure out ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is have a new party come in, be it a manager, public works director, and give them a blank page and say, figure out where we're headed. The boards need to determine where we're headed, and then you give that individual the tasking to say, go get it done, and expect them to get it done. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but that's, I feel very strongly this is what really needs to be done to make this thing work. And that's my pitch. So the idea is I'm planning to take this to the trustees next Tuesday night. Then I'm going to go on vacation for a couple weeks, thank goodness. So I'll leave the bomb and then leave. But what I also did is I provided separately a list to Pat of a few names of people that might fill that third person gap. I'm thinking of a couple public works directors who have experience, a lot of experience in public works, working for different communities. One's worked with a merged community. So there's a case. Potentially a developer, potentially an engineer that could be selected to look at this. It could be more than one person if that's what everybody, just because the memo says it's got to be one, maybe you want a couple voices. I don't know. But my thought process was that you would appoint 2 members from the select board, 2 members from the trustees, independent party, and then probably have someone, maybe like Greg, and I'm pointing to him, or someone to act as the note taker, the committee person to kind of sit in the meetings, make notes, and then write up a final report at the end. I would, again, prefer that my staff and I and Ricky in the village be totally out of the process.
Yeah, to make it fair.
Yep.
It'd be hard to have
Yep.
you guys in there.
We'll go
judge
where
it.
you want us to go.
We need the data from you, though.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we would do that right up front. And my hope would be that by this fall, that could be wrapped up, so as we start to do budgets, we kind of have a feel for where we're going for the next year in terms of budgets.
Right.
And how to prepare them. And that was a recommendation, that you accept these recommendations and we go forward.
Okay. Is there going to be a lot of discussion from the board on this? If so, I'd like to be able to say what we did before and table it. You want to deal with this?
I'm,
Okay. All right. Then we'll open it up to comments, questions for Dennis. And then we'll get to the CSWD. Mike?
No,
Oh, you didn't?
no, I was going to say, I didn't see any need to table it.
Okay.
I was prepared to move forward, but
Okay. Then I'd entertain a motion, and we can still have discussion, but entertain a motion.
So when do we discuss after the motion?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll move, Mr. Chairman, that the trustees and the select board accept and adopt. Wait a minute. Can I?
I think we just say the select board.
Yeah, thank you.
You can speak.
I move that the select board accept and adopt the recommendations for review of the consolidation of the public works highway and management functions as set forth in this memorandum.
Thank you, Mike. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Irene, okay. Any further discussion? Questions? Irene? We'll go Irene, or did you?
No, I know Irene had a comment.
Okay,
so I
yeah,
think
she had her hand
go
up.
first.
So, go ahead.
This looks like punctuation, but it does change the meaning in that 1A. I would just change a slash to a comma, because having it successful is different than partially successful. So I wouldn't combine those as an entity. Do you see where that is?
I'm sorry, I mean,
It says
I lost
under
you.
1A, has the consolidation effort been successful, and there's a slash.
Oh, I
after
gotcha.
it.
Should be a
I would just
comma.
put a comma in there,
Yeah,
and I
should be
know
a comma.
it looks like.
I think I went through and
Yeah.
changed one and didn't change the
Okay,
other.
thanks.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you, Irene. Sue?
I just had a question on, how do you, are you going to provide any guidance on how you gauge what is successful, what is partially successful, what is not successful? I mean, those are very kind of nebulous terms.
I think that's a judgment that the committee that looks at it has to make. My thoughts would be, you're probably going to find some things that we said we were going to do that were very successful. And you may find some things that we maybe should have done where we didn't quite do what as much as we could have done. And so I think it's a little bit of each. So it isn't necessarily an A, a C, or an F. It may be a little bit of each. But it's very hard, because the process is hard, to be able to, I think you want to get into not so much, that's not quite as important. I mean, it's important, but I think when I look at that as success, I mean, I look at, did we provide, the MOU said, were we going to do an integration study? The answer is yes. So is that successful? In my view, it is. We said we were going to do it, we did it. And the board got the document and said it was okay. So that's kind of the easy checkoff ones. The harder ones might be, what do residents feel about this?
Mm-hmm.
And you may be better gauges of that from phone calls and talking in Price Chopper or someplace else that I'm ever going to be the gauge at, because people aren't, I'll have some other residents will come up and drop off a chocolate cake and say, give it to the guys, they're doing a great job. Other residents will storm the door and say, you guys ought to be shot. Not literally, but you know what I'm saying. You get that wide range. So it is hard for us to gauge, but you represent those people, and to me, you have a better idea of what you view as being successful, or the committee members would be, than I ever will. I mean, I'm hoping we're successful in what we're doing, but my job isn't to evaluate myself. It's more for you to evaluate how is this working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a value judgment.
I just met one person's successful might be another person's partially successful, and how do you?
Pure judgment, I think.
I guess that's where the committee would have to kind of hash those kind
Yeah.
of things out.
That's why you have 5 people.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so we have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. Any further discussion then on approving the Public Works and Stormwater Consolidation Review memorandum? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
The next
Passes
step, I
5-0.
guess, would be at some future meeting for Pat to provide a name or names of people to serve with that, and then for the board to decide who the 2 people are going to serve on the committee.
And what's the timeline for that?
The time was, my thought process was it would probably involve a
Fall.
few meetings between now and September, and my guess it's going to be harder. The latter questions are much harder than the easier ones. I think the first meeting about what have we done, what do we say we're going to do, is going to be pretty easy to check off or read through and say, well, gee, there's a few other things they could have done and they didn't, so here's what they are. I think the harder part is the discussion of where we headed. And I have a feeling that, the first meeting might cover the first 1 or 2 items, and the next 3 or 4 meetings may cover the last few.
Right.
I'm guessing.
Okay. Good. One last thing?
Just to answer your question, the recommendation is that the members of the committee be defined this month, right? That's,
In May.
Yep, in May.
Right. So that'll be
In
something.
effect was the next meeting, so you
Right.
better make sure before you go on vacation.
I will be gone.
Right.
You give me the names.
I will.
Yeah, because, May 15th would be, I think it's a good point. Yep. Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very
Great.
much.
So as agreed to, we're going to jump to our 7:45, which is 5H, and we'll invite Sarah Reeves, and our rep on the CSWD for many years, Alan Nye, to go over the FYE 2018 CSWD budget. So welcome, and thank you. I know you have a busy night. You have a few places to go?
One more after this. Yes, I've
Okay,
already
we're a
been
few
to
minutes
2,
behind,
and,
but-
on to one more. But thank you very much. I appreciate your time. As you said, my name is Sarah Reeves. I'm the new general manager for Chittenden Solid Waste District. Started last August and have been nonstop ever since. It's
And
been-
loving it too, I'm sure, right?
It's a great job with a great group of people and a really great board. So, and I'm not just saying that. I really do.
We are fortunate to have Alan as our rep.
Absolutely,
He lives
absolutely.
and breathes that for sure.
So I'm pleased to present the fiscal 18 budget. I can happily tell you that the outlook for CSWD does remain strong. We're in a good financial position. We are looking at increasing the budget this year over last year, both revenues and expenditures. The proposed operating revenues are looking to be $11,282,932. The operating expenditures are estimated to be $10,525,152, so that will be a resulting net revenue over expenditures of just over $750,000, so keeping us in a positive position. And this proposed board budget was approved for adoption by our board last week, and this is why I'm able to be here with you today. We are also proposing that there be no increase to the solid waste management fee for fiscal 18. We will be drawing down out of our rate stabilization fund, and we will still have a good, healthy balance in that fund. So I am quite hopeful that we will also not need to raise the solid waste management fee in 19. I can't guarantee that at this point, but I am very hopeful that that will also be the case. So certainly no increase for this year, hoping for no increase for 19 as well. There will be a slight decrease in the biosolids fee, the management fee that the district charges the members who utilize the biosolids management process, and that is strictly related to a decrease in the amount of staff time. So there'll be a slight decrease there. Again, I think a good news. No increase as well in the tip fee for the materials recovery facility. That will remain at $21 a ton. So our customers are happy to hear that. There will be an increase we're proposing at one fee increase at the drop-off centers, and that is for food scraps. As you may be aware, food scrap management costs are going up. There will be a new requirement starting July 1 that requires haulers to offer the service. It does not yet require residents to separate their materials. So in order to try to equalize the playing field, haulers talked to us, and we agreed that we do need to make the cost for the food scrap management more visible. So we're proposing this year for fiscal 18 to charge $1.50 per bucket for food scraps, but only for people who are just bringing us the food scraps. So if you're also a user of the drop-off center and you're bringing us your trash, your recycling, and your food scraps, the cost of the scraps is still embedded in the price of the trash. So there will be no additional fee if you're using all of the services, only if you're only coming to the drop-off center to bring your food scraps, because there will now be an alternative. So we listened to the haulers. We thought they had a very good point, and we'll be implementing that starting July 1 at all drop-off centers. There will be a slight increase to small loads of gypsum at the Williston drop-off center, a significant increase to the large loads, and that is again to move larger loads of wallboard to the two commercial facilities that are in Chittenden County. It costs us quite a bit of money to manage larger loads of that material at Williston, so we'd rather see them go to the commercial entities that are in place. We're also looking to increase the tip fee at Green Mountain Compost to $52 a ton, again to equalize the market for the materials that are processed at Green Mountain Compost. So that will be on commercial loads as well there. Those are the highlights that I wanted to make sure that you were aware of. I'm happy to answer any questions or topics you may have.
Thank you for that overview. Questions for Sarah from the board? Andy.
I guess one clarification, then I got maybe a harder question. So if I show up at the dump with my bucket of banana peels and a piece of paper, I can recycle the piece of paper and dump my banana peels for free. Is that what you said, or no?
That is that has come up as well. Someone else brought up that fact. I mean, that's a judgment call. I understand. If you're really going to that extreme, then if it's not a long line at the drop-off center, maybe they'd let you get away with it. It's not the intent. It really is for people who are contracting for their other things and are not taking advantage of the food scraps with their hauler. Technically, we're really looking at, because the price of the food scraps was embedded in the trash, you really need to be bringing us your trash as well. So that's where we've placed the overall cost for the food scraps into that price. Recycling is also embedded in that price. So I think if you bring your food scraps and one piece of paper, that doesn't really count. But if you bring a small bag of trash, you collect it in your car, and you have your bucket, probably you'll be all set.
Okay. All right. Now the other question I had, you're a regional entity.
Yes.
You have a number of member communities. There are other regional entities that also exist, and potentially new ones that are being talked about being formed. The dispatch, for example. Is there any discussion among those regional entities to collaborate on aspects of your business that are common, like payroll or things like that? Because you've got somewhat redundant organizations as we're getting more and more regional stuff.
Are you speaking of specifically solid waste management entities or just regional entities in general?
Well, there's the water district, there's the waste district, there's the regional planning commission. There's discussions about having a regional dispatch for emergency services. Those are the ones I.
Okay, so one of the we are a member of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, so that is one entity that would help coordinate that. We take advantage of the insurance services, for example. So I think there's nothing that I'm aware of that would preclude us from cooperating or collaborating for different services. We haven't had that conversation that I am aware of. I don't know if all of you know at other times we have.
Yeah, I've sat on most of the regional county committees, but there's been no discussion from our end of things with respect to that. It's such a, each of the groups has such a varied personnel system and payment system that, we need to look at it maybe as a cost savings benefit, but it would get very confusing. I mean, everybody's got their own staff structure, with respect to how much people are getting paid, what their benefits are, all of those things. I mean, we're non-union, which has really been a good thing, I believe, for keeping the rates low for the county and things like that. But it's something we should look at.
Okay.
Yeah, we can ask the VLCT if others are having similar conversations. Happy to do that. It's a good idea.
All right, thanks.
Mike.
You mentioned in your report that you had a number of long-term serving people, and that retirements were going to be something that you were going to have to pay particular attention to. What wasn't as clear to me, and maybe I missed it, but do you find your staff weighted at both ends? In other words, are there young people coming up that you think are going to be able to fill these positions, or do you feel that you're going to have to go outside the organization to fill some of these?
The preference is always to hire from within whenever we can. And we have a really great pool to be able to pull from. However, we are small. We all wear many, many hats. So where possible, we do. It's a funny position to be in, because we're so fortunate to have people, long-term employees, who are still dedicated and still enjoy the mission and are enthusiastic and want to work, which is wonderful. And yet, for some reason, they want to leave us and go on and enjoy grandchildren, like Tom. I'm not sure. I guess that's fine.
Shame on him.
Exactly.
Really?
And he hasn't called me once since he left. I'm so sad. But you're right. So where we can pull from within our ranks, we do. We also have, especially for our drop-off centers, we have on-call, we have Saturday folks. So we look to that pool first. Whenever there's an opening, particularly in a drop-off center, that's where we like to bring. They're already trained. And we usually have a list of people who want to have a more regular position at the drop-off centers. For some of the program staff, it's a little bit different, although there's a great pool just within Vermont, whether it's from other districts or the state, who are very familiar with the process and with the rules and with the programs, who are looking to work for CSWD. And we don't have any shortage of applications when we do put out a position. So I feel very confident that we'll be able to fill any and all, but it's always a preference to hire from within whenever we can.
Okay, Sue. Pardon?
Had his hand raised.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
well, thank you. I just have a point of curiosity, really. What is the source of the fund for the rate stabilization? Is it part of your fund balance, or is it annually a part of surplus, or something else?
Yeah, it is part of surplus. So it's when the fee, and Ellen can probably speak better actually to this than I can. I'm quite honestly still learning, and Alan's been a member of the Finance Committee for a long time as well. But we would look at the revenues needed for covering the expenditures, and then we would move a portion each year into that rate stabilization fund. So that because the expectation was to have, I think, the rate be for 3 or 4 years, and we want to make sure that if there was any surpluses, they would go into that fund first, so that we could postpone any additional increases. So yes, that is where, from my understanding.
When we raised the solid waste management fee 3 years ago, we had thought that the first year we'd be making money, the second year we'd be on track, and the third year we'd use the money that we got in the first year. And what has happened is that we're going to approach 5 years with respect to the stabilization rate, and it may even go the 6th year. And what it was that I was concerned as a member of the Finance Committee that people would be telling their customers every year that your rate's going up. And this way, your rate went up, and then it didn't go up. It's not going to go up for, as far as the district is concerned, not going to go up for another 3 or 4 years. And that's being held back out there. So any excess surplus money that comes in under the solid waste management fee gets put in the reserve fund, Pat.
Thank you.
Okay.
Keep it up.
Sue.
Hi. Hello. I just read, part of the increase for salaries and wages is going towards an outreach and communications program
Yes.
staff.
Yes.
And I didn't know if you could expand upon
Sure.
what the intent there is.
Absolutely. So that is specifically going towards our business outreach. We, in response to Act 148, where there is increasing pressure, there's another step down for the organics. So as of July 1, the entities that are required to divert organics out of the waste stream steps down to 18 tons per year from the current 26. So we're looking to hire someone specifically for business outreach to assist business communities, schools, events as well in reaching that goal. We have in Chittenden County about 6,300 businesses, and we have 2 people who are primarily responsible for that. We have a school person, we have a municipal person, we have an event/business outreach person, and then 1 full-time. So we need more people to help us help our business community. So that is where they will be focusing. We also realize that we need to do more work with events. This is a major component of the waste stream, particularly as we're coming onto the summer season, as we know that more and more events are looking to achieve the diversion goals, which is good, and we need to be able to service those customers as well. So that really is where they're going to focus, is on business outreach.
Can I just follow up?
Sure.
Is there any, has there been any thought of providing opportunity for businesses to kind of share and learn from each other on this process?
That's a great question. We don't have a formal program, but that's a great idea. We do have waste warriors, and those are volunteers who go out into the community and will assist in any number of ways. We work with green teams, but we don't have anything specifically that is kind of a networking for this. We could work through the chambers, we could work through the sustainable business community. Well, nothing that we've sponsored. That's an interesting idea.
Just thinking there's some businesses that are obviously going to be much further ahead than
Right.
others that would probably be able to mentor some of the other
Right.
businesses.
It's a great idea.
Anything else? In section 1-A, page 3, where it talks about health insurance costs, it looks like the overall employee's contribution represents 11% of the total health insurance costs. Is there a target you're trying to get to? Because I see it went up a little bit as far as the overall base pay that they're putting towards their health insurance. Is there a target that you're trying to get to? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's not necessarily a target. The increase had not occurred. We hadn't had an increase in many years. And again, we're trying to hedge a bit. No one knows really what the increases may or may not be.
Right.
There's a lot of uncertainty, as everyone is
Yes.
well aware, particularly over the next year and a half. And part of the way to help alleviate some of those concerns was to raise the. We had thought about going to a little bit higher to 3.25. Thought that might be too big of a jump in 1 year, but it's something that we'll be looking at again probably halfway through once the rates start to be made more known in November, December. We'll look at it again and see if we need to further bump that up.
Yeah.
But as far as having a hard rate that we're trying to get to in steps, had not.
Okay. And then on in same section 1A, page 2, in section 3, it says material sales and other. You're projecting a strength of global commodity markets for recycled materials. I thought
Right.
that was actually getting softer, I guess.
So it's quite volatile, as you're aware. So and keep in mind, too, when the fiscal 17 budget was developed, it was still midway through 16. And at that point, many of the commodities markets were still fairly suppressed. They weren't depressed, but they were suppressed. And over the course of this calendar year, this last calendar year into fiscal 17, there was some rebounding, particularly in scrap metal. So we had projected a very, very low number because that was the actual for scrap metal. It rebounded very, very well. And we're actually projecting a little bit below what our current market basket is. Again, to be conservative, this is one area where I asked staff to be quite conservative. And yet, there's no need to be so below the market basket that it's unrealistic. Again, I wanted staff to really produce a realistic budget this time around. So we're looking at some stabilization, but again, because it's a global commodities market,
There's no way to
it's
predict
a
it, right?
guess. So right now we're at about $105 per ton for our market basket. We're looking at significantly lower than that for our budget. Currently, scrap metal prices are fairly good. Cardboard just took a little bit of a dip, but that's not unusual. It will go back up again. We're looking for plastics to go up over the summer. As the oil prices go up, it's all tied.
Right, that's tied to oil prices, and that's relatively low, I
This
guess.
time last year,
Yeah.
we underestimated
Right.
pretty significantly what our money is today. And so when you take that and go to where we are today, then really there's probably not a significant increase of what we're pulling in today for revenues.
Okay, yeah.
Just big over last year's budgeted number.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, and then just lastly, how's the Green Mountain compost business going? Is that turning a profit now?
It's growing. Well, turning a profit, that's a great question. We're still supporting it with the solid waste management fees, but we're also supporting the environmental depot. We are also supporting other programs. So the support that we provide to Green Mountain Compost is actually less than what we provide to some of these other programs, and that is also, I believe, included in your budget overview. Keep in mind, too, when the persistent herbicide issue hit, that pretty
That was
much
tough.
put us back to square one.
Right.
Right. So we had been making strides. That hit, everything stopped. So the way I'm looking at it is we're kind of in year 2 of a recovery. So what we're doing is I'm going to talk to the consultants tomorrow. We're going to be doing a business analysis of Green Mountain Compost to really understand where we are.
Okay.
So at that point, once we have a handle on what is the snapshot in relation to the different markets and in relation to our competitors, then we'll know better where we need to put our targets. So turning a profit, no, I wouldn't say that. We are still growing. So we're still accepting more material. Our revenues are continuing to grow. We're continuing to put more material out into the marketplace. The bags that we're putting out are increasing. We're having a huge year. You should see the mounds of material we have to process. So we're really positive as far as what the outlook is, but I cannot give you a date certain by which I expect us to turn a profit.
Okay. And with that law, with the scrap law, you should be getting a lot more material soon.
That,
right?
well, exactly. And, that's part of the conversation as well is, what is next, which is why we want to get the snapshot now
Okay.
to know where we can go, where we should go, where we want to go. And that will, be a very heavily discussed topic at our board.
Okay. Alan, did you?
No, I was just gonna, it's an interesting elephant to really deal with.
Yeah.
It just really is, but we'll see this year with respect to, where the sales end up.
Okay.
You have a cold spring and nobody's working in their garden and you don't sell any bags of compost or topsoil or anything else, but, we get a monthly report.
Okay.
It's pretty detailed as to how much waste has come in to be composted and how much has gone out and where we are with the budget, so it's a pretty detailed system.
Okay. Doing your best to keep that herbicide out of that stream.
We test
That was
every
horrible.
batch,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
And have seen zero evidence for quite some time.
Don't let your guard down. That's what
We don't. That's why we continue to test.
Okay. So you're looking for the board to approve it tonight, if
Yes,
possible,
please.
right? So what's the board's pleasure?
I would move approval of the CSWD FY 2018 budget proposal
As presented.
as presented.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second?
Okay, thank you. So any further discussion on the FY 2018 budget proposal for CSWD? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you for all
Thank
you
you very
do.
much. Thanks a lot.
Thank
And
you.
Alan, thank you for
Well
well
done.
continuing to be our rep. We
I won't
really
be back
appreciate
for
it.
another meeting for a while, though.
You never know.
Aw,
You're welcome
Alan.
anytime, Alan. Okay, so we're going to jump now back up on the agenda, back up to 5F, which is Essex appointment to the Regional Dispatch Joint Survey Committee. And Irene, you want to take us through that?
Sure. I included a memo in this week's packet, which talks about some of the things that I was struck by when I attended last week's meeting of the Joint Survey Committee looking at regional dispatch. Among the things that I noticed were how homogeneous the group was. That is the majority of people currently seated on that board, that committee, I should say, have town or city manager in their title. They talked about some issues that gave me pause as a voter. For example, their current charter draft language is intended to prevent 5% of the voters from petitioning a vote on that issue should their select board or city council not warn it. And there's a lot of the conventional wisdom that only members of the audience seem to be questioning, and that also raised some questions for me as to who Essex should be appointing to such a committee.
Okay, anything else?
I think that's a good start, and I'll be glad to entertain questions.
Okay. Any questions? All right. Sue?
Just a comment, I think, when I read through this, one of the things that really struck me was the reference to continuity. And I think that that's something that's worthwhile to consider, that we have someone on that can see it through if that's where the community wants to go.
Yeah, so it would be somebody that you wouldn't want to see quit. Is that what you mean?
Well, I think in reference to Pat, who was planning to retire, that we know about, if we didn't know about it, then we didn't know about it, but we know about it, so, just thinking ahead that this would go potentially past that point in time, correct?
I don't think he would necessarily have to stop being
That's valid.
that rep.
Yeah, it's valid.
If we wanted him to continue, and if he were so willing, if he were appointed to that. Okay, any other, Andy?
Yeah, section 3 in this memo, there's a comment that says the select board has twice hesitated to appoint him, meaning Pat, as our rep, as he is busy managing 2 municipalities and plans to retire next year. I just want to clarify that that's not why I hesitated to move forward. My larger concern is the implication of committed staff time other than the town manager's time. So my hesitation, I was hesitating to appoint anybody as a rep. It wasn't specific to Pat, and there was no, from my point of view, it wasn't to save Pat time or concern about him retiring. It was completely that we have other priorities that we also have on our plate that staff needs to attend to. And so this doesn't represent my position.
Yeah, good point. Other comments, questions? Irene?
I think there's a larger issue, which of course is, do we appoint someone at all? And I would recommend that, because the seat has been set aside for Essex, that we do take the Regional Planning Commission up on having a seat, having a voice in this process, and shaping it to the best of our ability.
So when I read through this, Irene, the name that came to me to be on this is you. It seems like you would be well suited for it.
I'm not wedded to that.
Pardon?
I'm not wedded to that outcome. I think there are other residents who do know about governance, and
yeah, that's because it's a UMD that's being
absolutely
requested. And I know that you put out a lot of information about UMDs, and I think that would be helpful for that committee to hear your views on those. From my
I don't disagree. I'm just not wedded to seeing myself. That's not why I wrote the memo. I wrote the memo because I think there are other residents of Essex who are also well suited to this, and I would like the board to consider all of them.
Would you consider yourself in the running for that?
Only if the board would support anyone that was appointed from this town, as far as giving due consideration to the warnings and not considering it in light of prior UMDs that we have or have not voted for. I would like to see it considered on its own merit, and what I heard over the last couple of months was that because we had problems with the prior STD, that we wouldn't be able to, you know, we were sort of biased against this perhaps, or that maybe it would be not worth our time participating in this. And the 90 minutes I spent at that meeting were some of the most informative that I've spent in any meeting in a long, long time. So I think anyone who goes to a meeting like this will find it equally valuable.
But it sounds like, so you would consider, if the board so chose, you would consider?
I would consider it.
Excellent.
I plan to go to the meetings whether or not. I am appointed because I find it that interesting, and I would make time for that.
Okay. Because I know that the last time we talked about this, the select board agreed to have Pat go, and I think to go to the next two. And I was a little surprised to see that you went, but of course it's open to anybody. But you went as a rep of the select board, it sounds like. Because
No, I went as a...
You were talking about your constituents at that meeting, which says you have your select board hat on.
I also spoke as a voter about other things, so it's kind of hard to, as Pat always says, you can't take off your select board hat, right? So I didn't want to pretend to not be a selectman in there, but there were times where I said, as a voter, this offends me, for example.
But
so,
you specifically, what I understand, talked about constituents, so it sounds like you went there as a rep, and that's not what that I expected to happen at this meeting. I thought we agreed that Pat would go, and of course anyone can go as a resident. So I'm just surprised that you acted as a rep of the.
That was my intention, to represent my peers at the board. I was representing myself as an individual who happens to have 21,000 constituents, whose input comes to me. But I'm a member of a select board. I was not speaking for the select board.
I think it's implied that you are when you talk about your constituents. That's all. You're no longer just a person, non-selectman. You're actually a selectman when you speak like that. So you just all need to be aware when we talk about that. We try to, if you're going as a resident, you need to act like a resident and not accidentally represent the board.
I wasn't accidentally representing the board. I was representing my constituents because, as someone who's elected as a selectman, I am not aware that I am ever allowed to take off that select board hat unless I say otherwise.
Okay. In the note that you said you're going as a citizen. So I don't want to belabor it, but I was just surprised that you went and spoke as a selectman as opposed to a resident, is all.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think you with your information and background, I think you'd be you could provide some pushback on the UMD. Anything else, Andy?
Yeah. Part of the discussion that we had before, I mean, the question of whether to appoint anybody, we had asked Pat to attend a couple meetings and come back with some feedback, I
Right.
thought, as to whether it would be appropriate for us to participate. I know Mike had expressed some concern about not getting left behind or missing out on something. So should we have that discussion? I don't know if that's specifically, is that
Well, that's next.
appropriate given this agenda that we have before us to get that feedback? Or,
Well, that's next, that
I mean,
is
that-
next
that-
on the agenda, so I just wanted to, yes, Sue.
I just think, I think there's a couple of questions in front of our board, right? And I don't know that the agenda item clearly is clear enough, because the next agenda item is specifically, should we appoint Pat, correct? So don't we need to first decide, like Annie said, whether we want to appoint someone, and that was based on some knowledge or feedback? And then if we decide that we do want to appoint someone, don't we have to consider what the options are for who we would want to appoint, and then make that decision?
Andy?
I think we need to use our normal process for accepting or advertising for, interviewing, and selecting volunteers. I don't think that we as a board could just handpick somebody. I think we probably ought, if we want to
Do someone other than
do
Pat.
something, someone other than Pat, I think we need to use our normal process of selecting volunteers, because there may be plenty of people who are interested in doing this, and we could have choices that haven't yet been presented to us. I know that a prior list was provided to us, and in that, there were 3 people on that prior memo that we got in our consent agenda, the last meeting or the meeting before, but it wasn't clear that any of those people were actually interested in doing it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. We should probably follow the process. Can't go wrong with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for letting us know that, Barbara. Okay, Mike, you had a question.
My own view is that certainly if we're going to go down the road of finding someone else to sit on the board other than Pat, I would support that, but I think we need a voice on that committee now.
Okay, before we actually continue that, that's actually the next agenda item, I think.
Yeah,
What I'd like to do is make sure that Irene's closed with what she's offering here, and then we can go on to that, Mike, and that's where I think your discussion would be.
Well, I disagree, but that's fine.
Before leaving the subject.
Sure, yeah, we can do that. Okay, so Irene, I want to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to point out on this, or?
Yes, I'll point out that my request is that the select board appoint a joint study committee member who will add diversity to this board, which is currently made up of 7 men, the majority of whom have a function as a city or town manager or work in that department. And I would like diversity to be in gender, race, creed, age, etc., job title, familiarity with UMDs, skepticism when it comes to this form of government, and decision-making paths. And what I meant by that was someone who can ask different questions, seek non-obvious alternatives, refrain beliefs, and dialogue rather than dictate. And that's a very different skill than what I saw exhibited by the people on the board, on that committee on Wednesday morning. Thank you.
Okay, as far as title, I think Charlie was very clear. He wanted the managers to be on that, I think, right?
No, he didn't.
He said that specifically. Yeah, that was specific. Okay, so is there a motion?
Do you want questions before you go?
Yes, before we go to motion, thank you. Yes, could you state your name for the record too, Paul?
Could someone just say a few words as to the significance of this JSC and the dispatch committee and 9/11? Can somebody put that together so we have a feeling for what does it mean if you don't join? What does it mean if you do join? And if you do join, are we signing up for things that we may not be comfortable with? Because, again, I may not be following it, but to be told that 5% of the people cannot voice a concern written into the agreement doesn't sit well. So maybe somebody can say a few words as to what the whole intent of this is. And I would assume it has to do with how fast can we get emergency vehicles? Do we subscribe to 911? Do we pay for that? Are we doing better without it? Can somebody wrap that up?
I think if you talk about big picture on this consolidation of dispatch, it's to look at two savings, I think. One would be the potential of time savings between when a call comes in and when emergency vehicles and personnel can be dispatched. And the second is there's a possibility of doing it as you consolidate to do it more cost effectively eventually. So by having a rep on this study committee to come up with the agreement, and this bit about the 5%, it isn't set in stone yet, right? This agreement hasn't gone to the Attorney General for approval yet, so it's still this committee that is being formed would have to develop that. And my understanding, and Pat can correct me if I'm wrong, is that any municipality that puts a member onto that study committee then is basically saying that they would put this consolidation to a vote of the community. No?
I don't agree. I think you're committing to making the decision whether or not you're going to warn a special meeting to do so.
Right. We could decide not to do it.
We could decide not to do it, correct.
But it's assumed that you will, but you don't. You'd have to do something to say you won't.
Right.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. So in this study committee, then, I don't know how long it's going to take to come up with an agreement that defines what the governance is that all communities could live with, and they're looking to get input from reps from all the communities. We have an interest to watch it. We're not broken, I don't believe, in our community. We have a new facility. We have round-the-clock dispatchers. But we'd be foolish to not keep our toe in this to say, well, maybe there's something good that can come out of this consolidation thing that we do want to participate in. But it's not clear that that's going to be anything in there that's to our advantage yet. Maybe there will be, but we'll have to see. And we want to be able to be in that position to say we want to participate or not. And I think that goes to Mike's thing. He'd like to make sure that we have a representative from our board, if I can put, hopefully not putting words in your mouth, so that our interests are defined in that agreement. Is that fair?
I think the concern the board should have is that if, I'm just saying what was just said, we join the JSC and we don't really agree with the components of that. Most we do, some we don't. That goes forward and we're locked out. We've already agreed by joining the JSC that majority rules. That would be my first point. My second point, it sounds like we're pretty good. So have we really, can we articulate what we've got to gain other than simply saying we're not sitting at the table?
That we can have to gain by being at the table?
That's correct. In other words, we're at the table. This 5% isn't going to get voted on. Either that group will vote as to whether or not that's what they want to go forward with, and by definition, we're a party to it. And that's what bothers me.
Did you want to?
I would, well, I'm not being asked a question, but I'd be happy to offer a perspective.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Paul, I think, I don't know that you have it 100% correct. This group will be, the part you do have correct is that the Joint Study Committee is consistent of the 8 municipalities that have dispatch. And there's 8 seats available to be on this committee. If you are absent from this seat, your input on creating the agreement that will come before us and also go to the Attorney General might be missing something that would be beneficial to us. And one of the things that could be beneficial to us is that if we don't join it now, what will be the buy-in cost to join it later if it's in our best interest to do so, and can we? So my Plagueman raised this a meeting ago, is that is it beneficial for us to be at the table? And one of the things I'm going to say at the next agenda item is that I believe it is beneficial to be at the table, if for no other reason to make sure things come back to the legislative bodies so that they can have public meetings on the language before it goes to the Attorney General. And I do believe that there's language in the original, one of the many early drafts that didn't have that, but I was happy to see at the meeting that Irene made reference to that it is definitely part of one of the whereases of this agreement, that it will come back so that the elected officials will be able to weigh in. So I think that's a good safeguard. Whether or not we're buying something that we don't need now is a little bit different than whether or not we're exercising our rights to have that option in the future should we need it. And there may be lots of other things that we don't know about right now. This is just a group of people on the governance side of the house. There's an awful lot going on the technical side of the house between and among the folks that are actually going to be making this thing work and who are going to be the direct and indirect recipients of how well this works, namely the police, the fire, and the rescue community. And I can say with a great deal of certainty that the governance work will be done long before that work is done at the current schedule and the current pace. So it sounds like we're going to be making a very quick decision. The fact is that the decision may not be made very quickly, but I think that feeds in more to what Selectman Plagueman said at the previous meeting. It's all the more reason why we need to make sure that we have a seat at the table.
My concern is gathering clouds. We're creating districts, we're creating committees. More and more, the voters are being given an arm's length from being able to make changes or discuss issues. Now, we ought to be able to say, here's what we can do with our resources today. We're intelligent, we've got smart, all right? We ought to be able to say, what are the additional things that we think we need? And if there's some real critical ones, okay. But if it's kind of, well, you know, they made something we won't be able to comment on, I would have a tendency to scissor that off. Because again, I'm really concerned that we're losing our control of the various committees, the districts, and everything else that's being formed. And especially this thing about this 5%. Now here today, we may all say, probably won't happen. But if it does happen, that's one more component or one more item that kind of gets under your skin. And I just wonder, what do we lose versus what might little gain? So I won't bear on this, but I just hope the board thinks these things through before vectoring everything to committees and districts.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Irene.
So you asked why this came about, I believe, and it was because we're told there's a 60 to 90-second delay in processing the average emergency call to 911 for a town like Essex. And to some people, that may be a matter of life and death. So if that is indeed a true statistic, then I think we belong on that committee looking for ways, since our charge as selectmen is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of our residents and guests. So given that, I would also point out that the draft language of the agreement says that a town must be on the JSC in order to warn this agreement to their voters in March of 2018, for example. So that draft language, of course, could change, but so far it has not. Also, we've talked about, on Wednesday, we talked about the fact that the board that will follow on and actually run this regional dispatch governing body would be made up of the people who are sitting around the table now, and they prefer, yes, city managers or their designees. So there's an absolute way for someone who's not working in the city manager's office to be part of this board.
Barbara?
Just a general comment. I find it difficult to see why we have to separate these two items. decide to be on it. Then second, who do you appoint? And so I think you're making this too complex by saying you must act on what Irene has suggested.
I'm going by the agenda, Barbara.
Pardon?
I'm going by the agenda. And that's what's how we run the meetings. So,
I don't think the second item says to decide whether or not you're going to be on the study committee. I think the second item says to appoint somebody. So I don't think you're going by the agenda either way.
and well, okay, Barbara.
So,
Thank you for
I mean,
your comments.
And then line up.
Well, don't brush those off. Make the select board made up this.
Paul, if you want to be recognized, please raise your hand. Thank you. Barbara, you can continue. Paul, I'm asking you, Barbara has the floor. You interrupted. I'm going to ask you to stop, and I'm going to allow Barbara to continue, if she'd like.
I'd like to make one other comment. You made the comment earlier that you could have appoint Pat even if he was not the town manager. That may be true, but I would hope that you would only appoint someone who was either on the select board, who was a member of the staff, or a citizen of the town of Essex. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I apologize for cutting you off. Okay, Jen?
Jan Ellis Clements. I agree with many of the comments being said here and very concerned also about gender equity as far as and titles. I've held numerous positions in my lifetime. I have a PhD. You know, I've seen politics. I've seen it all, and I really would like to see more diversity on this committee if we're going to be a part of it. I really think it needs to be opened up to more citizens to look at who could be on that. So, I mean, it just really deeply concerns me. I actually personally have been in a car accident twice. Emergency response. I've been in a wheelchair twice for 6 months. I've had my father rushed to the, hospital probably 6 times in the last couple years. I understand response time. When you're lying there, it's not fun. So I just really think it's going to be important who's on that committee, who really can understand this, and not just be people with the same titles, with the same, gender. We need to get some more diversity. This is what we talk about in schools. We talk about it everywhere. And I want to see it.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Okay, okay. So, what's the board's pleasure on this? Are we done? Is there a motion? What would you like? Mike?
I'm not clear how we resolve Irene's memo. I mean, is it calling for a motion? I don't see where it calls for a motion. I'm not sure whether we're just supposed to take this under
that's what I'm saying.
advisement I'm not sure whether we're supposed to take this under advisement for the next piece of this, or whether we need to act on it. But if we need to act on it, there's no real clear direction on what we're supposed to be
I'll
doing.
ask Irene to answer that, if you would.
I would make a motion that the select board consider appointing someone and not leave that seat vacant. And that you take under advisement my recommendations for diversity. To set an example for the constituents we have who current boards and committees, at least within town hall, do not fairly represent.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? Andy?
I guess just the process of asking for volunteers and interviewing them and making the selection. I understand that we could get, if we move forward in a different, not appointing Pat to this. I don't know how we force people of diversity to join or to offer up their service if they don't.
Maybe I can ask.
I guess we just. I guess the intent would be to make it available and there's, what do you do if the best candidate isn't a diversity candidate? That's where the struggle comes, and I guess you'd have to make that choice. I'm not saying that's the expectation. Certainly, is not the expectation.
I had the same thought. Yeah. I think Mike had his hand up, and then we'll go to Sue.
Go to Sue first. I'm
Okay.
still putting my thoughts together.
Sue?
I guess I would just expand diversity. I think you're interpreting diversity from a gender perspective. I don't know. You're right. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think that there's a broad spectrum of diversity, and I'm pretty sure if we throw it open to the public, we'll get a diversity in terms of applicants coming forward. Okay.
Mike?
I'm going to call a point of order here.
Okay.
Because I happen to agree with this. But we've got an agenda item where it calls for an up or down vote about whether we're going to ask Pat to serve on this. Okay. There is no reason why we can't do both. And to have discussions, long discussions about diversity and what we're going to do later on, I think is out of order.
Okay, so you're...
like I said, I want to be 100% clear. I agree with this, and I will support it. But I think we need to follow the agenda. We have the next action item calling for someone to be appointed to that board. We know what Pat's situation is. There is absolutely no reason why we cannot do both. Okay. Absolutely none.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, I guess I focused on the second part of the motion, which was the advisement. The initial, the main point of it is to whether or not to appoint somebody. And I had previously commented that I was less in favor of it because of staff time, and it still is a concern. And now I'm going way off track here. I think I'll reserve these comments to the next agenda item.
Okay. Now we have a motion on the table, and it's been
Yes.
seconded, so we need to deal with
Yeah.
that. We can, if you want to take that off the table for now, if that's okay, and then have this next discussion or include it. What's the board's pleasure? I want to do what you think is most prudent here.
I'm going to ask Irene to repeat the motion, seeing as how we've kind of gone off the rails.
Maybe Sam's got it written down now.
Sam, do you have it?
Only part of it.
You want to?
Catch the rest of it.
Well, can I paraphrase, Mr. Chairman?
Being a member, and then I lost you after that, but I knew it was similar to someone with diversity.
I think the key for me was that the first point of the motion was that we appoint someone to serve on the JSC with the understanding that we would explore options on increasing diversity for that position, knowing that there will be an opening there in the future.
That works for me.
Is that a accurate reflection?
That works for me as far as making a motion that we can stomach and then maybe move on to the next agenda item.
Okay. So the goal of the motion is to say appoint and
Or not appoint.
Or not appoint.
Right.
And if you appoint, it's one with hopefully diversity. It doesn't require it to be a diversity candidate, or are you saying that would be preferred? Because if it has to be a diversity candidate, then that says something completely different to me. So, and the motion's on the table, so I'm just trying to get clarification of what that motion means.
Go ahead, Sue.
I would interpret the motion to be to consider, to have those different
Okay.
factors of diversity be consideration when we're looking at candidates.
That I'm good with. Okay. It's
Works for me.
considerations. Great. Okay. All right, so is it clear what the motion is? It's, do we want to appoint and with a candidate with the diversity considerations? If I paraphrase.
The "and" is what's screwing that up.
Okay.
They don't go hand in hand.
We can split them. Why don't we? Can we split it?
And I believe, and I will stand corrected if I'm incorrect, but I believe that Irene's memo was to go to the next agenda item, but to consider adding someone that would have diversity. I didn't interpret the motion to be both. I interpreted the motion to take care of the next agenda item and then take concrete steps for when we look for a replacement to go out and make sure that we get a diverse candidate.
Okay, so you want to do this other agenda item, answer this question first about do we want to appoint?
I hear Mike saying that we're taking care of it.
I believe we're taking care of it.
Eddie.
But what I heard Mike say, and I'm asking because I want to make sure I'm clear that approving this doesn't take Pat off the table. In the immediate, as an immediate appointment to this committee, it's when Pat retires, who do we replace him with? That's what it sounds to me that was what Mike is saying.
That is exactly what I was trying to say and didn't do a very good job of it. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Seeing as how we're still in the discussion part of the motion that's on the table, I really, really think we need to put someone on that committee now, tonight. And I'm going to support Pat Scheidel to be named for that. Now, whether we take the next meeting and we put together the public announcement that we want to put out looking for candidates to replace, that's fine. But I don't want to go through this meeting without having somebody on that committee by the time we adjourn tonight. I think it's that important. I think Pat's the best suited for the immediate term, and I think every meeting we waste not putting somebody on that committee is going to come back and bite us. I truly believe that.
Okay.
I have it on reliable information that there's stuff going on behind the scenes. I want us at the table.
Okay. Got it. Sue.
So I could agree with everything that you've said except for the time frame that was put on in terms of providing a replacement. I would kind of think of it as like if there is this urgency, and I don't disagree that there is this urgency, that Pat be like an interim appointee with the work for us to do to get something out there to the public to assign a permanent member of the committee.
Okay. I think we're going to have to take that up when this agenda item comes up, though, right?
Sure.
And change the language of the motion. But I would certainly discuss that.
Okay, so it's still not fully clear to me what this motion that's on the table is about. Is it two parts? Is it appointing and then having that candidate be hopefully a diversity candidate? Or is it just that if we appoint somebody, we should consider a diversity candidate? I don't know what the motion's about. Greg, did you take it down?
I took it out.
Okay.
Hopefully it captures it, but it's paraphrased, but I wrote down the motion was to appoint somebody to the committee with consideration for diversity.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so
But does that address, you have that motion, and then you go and you vote for Pat for his term. Is that,
I think you can make a motion that everyone, well, if it's a vote in the affirmative, then they agree to appoint somebody with consideration for diversity, and then we can move on to the next agenda item and consider Pat as that appointee.
is that your intent?
I would just raise the point that the select board at its last meeting asked Pat to attend a couple of meetings
Sure.
on our behalf, so I don't feel a necessity to appoint Pat as interim. Pat is already showing up at the meetings on behalf of the select board, which I was not. I was showing up as an individual who was curious in the audience about what was going on. So I don't feel a need to appoint Pat as interim. He's already been asked by the select board to show up to a couple of meetings.
Okay.
That would be redundant, I think.
Pat?
Let's recognize how Pat got into this thing. When this matter of appointed the committee came about from Charlie Baker, the executive director for regional planning, there was an express interest that if there was a city or a town or a village manager in one of the communities that had a dispatch, that would be the preferred person, in large part because it was an administrative function. And they wanted to have someone who could quickly tell staff what to do in gathering data, etc. Now, that certainly didn't play too well with Burlington, since they don't have a manager, and the Burlington mayor chose somebody who had experience in these areas and appointed the fire chief. Williston, I don't think, had a city manager at the time, or had an interim city manager, and they chose somebody who had staff-related hands-on experience in fire service and those kind of issues. And there is no city manager or town manager in the town of Milton, and that position is being filled quite admirably by their first, the chair of the select board. So we didn't join right away for any number of reasons, and I sort of agree. I'm going to go back to Mike again. I sort of agree that there's lots of work going on by staff of various kinds, that being at the table probably is a good idea. And it's not like that I haven't kept an ear to what's going on. I have been listening very intently to my friends in Colchester, who've kept me kind of involved and somewhat current with what's going on, and I've offered my comments via that route, even though I wasn't formally representing anybody at that time. What, the agenda is the agenda, and you're absolutely right. There was probably not an easy way to get to either one of these topics, so which one was going to be first. So to make life easy, if you decide that you want someone at the table, and you want someone at the table immediately, and you want somebody who's current or relatively current, or at least can get caught up quickly, I'd be more than happy to be an interim, if that's the choice that you want to choose. Or if you don't want anybody there, I would advise against it. But if my memo is going to cause much consternation to what you all collectively want, I mean, I'm the hired gun. I work for you. So again, recognizing where we are, the time schedule for this governance committee is optimistic, in my opinion, of having a vote at the town meeting for 2018. And I say optimistic with some confidence. But that's, and if I retire tomorrow and you name me, I certainly would stay until you hired my replacement, and the seat would still go to that individual. Or you could continue your recruitment and selection process as you normally do, and replace me, and I am very easily replaced. So just trying to provide as much opportunity and flexibility to meet with whatever you want to do, and still sort of maintain a place at the table. And again, always recognize that being at the table and making this decision, you are saying that at some point you will have a discussion of whether or not to have a vote. And just as long as everybody knows that, it wasn't really clear when we had our presentation. There's a 2-hour video that clarifies every point ever discussed on this matter, should anybody wish to go through 2 hours and view it. I think the one person who has done that is Irene Renner, and both of us were at the rollout meetings and at the meeting last Wednesday morning. So anyhow,
Thank you. So we have the motion. It's been seconded. We've had our discussion. Is everybody clear on the motion? It's short. Read it, if you would, please.
Motion to appoint somebody to the Joint Study Committee with consideration for diversity.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so everybody clear on what we're going to vote on here?
And I would add that diversity doesn't mean diversity as we throw it around in the colloquial sense. It should point to these 5 factors that I've listed.
For consideration.
I'm not just looking for somebody who's of a different race or something. That's not the kind of diversity I'm necessarily looking for. I'm looking for someone who's got these qualities, because if I go back to number 2, what the Joint Survey Committee is looking for is someone who's familiar with this work and can represent your municipality with a broad perspective. Since we've just been through the whole special tax district thing, we happen to have more experts, I think, than most towns available to fill a seat like this.
Okay.
And we have several people who really understand local government who don't necessarily sit at this table or work in this building.
Okay. Any further discussion on this before we vote? Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay? Okay, so the motion passes 4-1. All right, we're going to move on to the next item, which is the appointment of town manager as the town's representative to the study committee for regional dispatching. So,
And for the third time before
Yeah,
you,
exactly.
here's a memo covering this topic, as we have already mentioned to everybody. My role, by your vote at the last meeting, was to attend a couple of meetings as an interested citizen, observe what's going on, and come back with a recommendation to what to do next. And I view that as not being limited to making a recommendation to have someone at the table. With what I'd gathered before the meeting and what I saw at the meeting and who they elected as their chair and who they elected as the vice chair and how they were proceeding with their meeting, I was quite confident that the group had formed a structure and that the group had entertained some form of action that had a purpose and a deadline behind it. They also, as we have done, they had a member of that group paying for legal fees and legal services by having one of their legal staff persons working very diligently on this agreement. It's not a charter, it's an agreement. And you will recognize the name as Andrew Baldock, who used to work for McNeil, Liddy, and Sheehan, who himself has gained quite a bit of experience in these matters and who is now a staff attorney for the city of South Burlington. So he's been providing them with some knowledgeable assistance in the matters of the law. And Colchester has used their town attorney as well to help bolster some of the legal nuances associated with this process. So having seen that, having been part of some of those discussions offline with Aaron and Don Francis, I was comfortable in making this recommendation. I will sit as long as you want me to sit, or sit as long as I can sit, and keep the chair warm for my successor, whomever that may be, whether it's the manager. A citizen, I knew of Irene's memo Friday. Doug mentioned to me that it had been submitted. I was on vacation for the last 3 days. And I knew there was going to be 2 memos of equal discussion point. I liked having Irene's first, however, on the pecking order to have that discussion out. So I'm sorry that it might have not sit well with everybody, but I think that was the right order for that to appear. So really, I'm recommending that you appoint me to the Regional Dispatch Study Committee. And it's not called the Regional Dispatch Study Committee, it's called the Joint Study Committee. And they're focusing on regional dispatch, but I thought I saw the name Public Safety Committee. And that opens up the door for, more services, but, Moxnix, the bulk of all the discussion is on regional dispatch at this point.
Okay.
So that's...
Okay. Comments, questions? Motions? Anybody want to make a motion? Andy?
I move that the Select Board appoint the town manager to the Public Safety Joint Study Committee.
Thank you.
Can we make a comment on this particular before the vote?
We actually have a motion. The rule is when we do a motion, we don't have input. we were just in the, that's a good point, Barbara. Paul, would you like to care to make a comment?
Yeah, the only thing I would suggest the board consider, you know, we've been very lucky to have Pat. Pat worker, always took the point. But Pat is going to be retiring, and he has a major responsibility now as town manager. And I'm trying to think of a new person coming in. And these positions are not easy to fill. You have to have some level in terms of how you handle people, how you handle processes, how you handle this, that, and the other thing. And I think rather than adding more to what that individual is going to have to take on, we ought to start tapering down. Again, Pat's done a lot of hard work, always taking the point. So it's not anything against Pat, but I do think the board has to be concerned how it's going to be managing the town as the months slip by. So not a vote against that, but I would suggest that you do reconsider others that could be very good people that have backgrounds in finance, people that have backgrounds in other disciplines that the board could certainly use. So that would be the only request I make with this.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, other comments, questions?
I
Actually,
would-
okay, so thank you. You have a motion on there to appoint Pat, and I was looking for, is there a second?
I will second that, and then I have a comment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, yes, further comments?
With respect, Mr. Austin, I agree with you, but we haven't got the time to put a public service announcement out soliciting applications for this position, in my view. It's one man's opinion, but it's that important. I don't say that we shouldn't do that, and I don't say that we couldn't take that up on May 15th, which would be our next board meeting. But I reiterate what I said before. I would be extremely disappointed if this meeting adjourned and we did not have Pat sitting in that seat for the time being.
Thank you. I would submit it doesn't have to be a service report. I can't imagine anybody taking an objection to the board itself. Amongst yourselves, private meetings saying, who are the names tonight? I can't imagine anybody in the town taking exception to that. I understand what's being said. You go through that level of formality, times being chewed up. I don't think it has to be that quick, because isn't it March of 2018 where things have to congeal? Not in the next month, or 2 months, or 3 months. So again, just asking the board, take your time and get someone that you feel very comfortable with, and they'll do a good job.
If we did that behind the scenes, sir, we would get, I can hear the wailing and gnashing of teeth from here.
So
You're not being transparent. You didn't offer it to other members of the town. That, with respect, that idea, I appreciate it, but
That can happen.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table, and it's been seconded, so actually,
Yep.
we're supposed to keep it
I'm
amongst
done.
us. Okay. So I'm still concerned about the workload that Pat has on his plate, and adding more to it gives me great pause. Sue?
I guess I'm still concerned about the time frame, because this is making it as a single appointment, and I think it would be important to include in the motion that it be, we just all approved
Well, 4 to
the
1.
previous motion, which
Didn't all
was,
approve, no.
4 to 1.
oh, okay, 4 to 1, I'm sorry. Majority approved the motion, the previous motion on the table, which was to take into consideration these different components of diversity when making the appointment.
So you're suggesting to with a friendly amendment to say have Pat appointed as the interim?
Correct, and
committee
maybe
member?
even with, yes, and maybe even with some context of that we would be proceeding with seeking members of the public for the appointment.
Okay, Mike?
Pat's announcement that he is going to retire in June of 2018 puts the title of interim in front of his name, whether he likes it or not. There is a date sensitive of when he's decided to leave. I couldn't agree more with Irene or Sue that we should move on getting someone to replace, because I worry about the workload as well. But again, I think it would be a huge mistake not to put him there now. And if you want to start putting this on the agenda for May 15th, then let's do it. I'm 100% behind you.
To put what on the agenda for May 15th?
To go out and look for someone to take his place before June of 2018. Do it right away. I agree.
Okay.
But don't
So it
let
sounds like you're-
tonight go without having somebody in that seat.
Okay, so it sounds like you're agreeing with Sue to have it be interim.
It's not in a sense. I agree with Sue.
Okay.
Excuse me, it's my motion.
Yeah, and it would be up to you if you're agreeable to have that changed to interim or not.
I'm not.
You're not?
Not agreeable, no.
Okay. Okay, and okay. Any further discussion on this of appointing Pat to this committee? Irene?
I sent an email to Doug after the first meeting we had when Pat was not here, so I'm not sure of the date, but I believe it was 4 to 6 weeks ago, that I sent 3 names to Doug, and I asked my peers on the select board to also submit names of people they thought would be excellent choices for this. And I'm just sorry to see that so much time has elapsed and we've come full circle, and now we're ready to consider people, but we're feeling the time pressure. We shouldn't be feeling the time pressure now if we weren't feeling it 6 weeks ago. I would hope that we wouldn't make a decision we regret in 4 to 6 weeks, because all of a sudden this has become urgent. The conversation was had weeks and weeks and weeks ago at this table that other people should be considered. So, for what that's worth, in case people didn't remember it or in case it wasn't in those detailed minutes, which I thought it was.
Right, you had brought that up.
I did.
Okay.
And that's for Paul and people who weren't here to understand that.
I'm going to take Mike's statement one step further. Every minute that I serve, I volunteer to be an interim. So I will put this memo back on the agenda for the next, for the May meeting, so that you can continue walking down the steps to accommodate, whatever diversity you may or may not wish. I do feel that I'm being singled out, that I'm an old man with an old job title. No, I'm only kidding. I do not feel that at all. It will help, keep us going further.
What do you mean you bring it back next week?
I'll bring Irene's memo back the next board meeting to continue the discussion. But meanwhile, the people know that there's somebody
on it,
going to be on the committee right away.
The next committee meeting isn't until after our next select board meeting, however.
No, maybe so. So,
for what that's worth, I mean, if people are feeling a lot of pressure, there's nobody meeting in the next 2 weeks about this issue unless you're meeting with the private friends you have in Colchester, which you're allowed to do, right, as a citizen. But
I still have a few friends left. Yeah,
of course. But there will be no meeting of this joint survey committee in Colchester with the RGSC and the whole rest of the board present before we meet again, just in case people are feeling that stress. It's undue.
Sue?
I would just like to ask Andy why he's opposed to adding the word interim to the motion. Because I don't hear from anybody else that that's a problem. I'm just curious.
I guess the concern is, what does interim mean? I think if as Mike has pointed out, it's like 14 months. Did I do the math right? 15 months. Pat will be retired, but I guess I don't want it to be a temporary situation. That's shorter than that. We've talked about the question of continuity and having you know, anybody who's interested in participating in this committee can go and attend all the meetings and make public comment. So I think a lot of the discussion about having people at, you know, in the room participating in the meetings that have experience or opinions about UMDs, they are able to do that without actually being on the committee. They may, you know, they don't won't get a vote in that group, but they can certainly add in their opinions. But I guess this is maybe off track from your question. I guess it's more that I don't see that it needs to be temporary. I guess thinking forward, if we vote this down, does that mean that we can never appoint Pat, or does it mean? Hmm? No.
And Pat, if we don't appoint him tonight, can still attend the meetings as we requested and give his input.
You've already given me authority to go to 2 meetings. I just jumped the gun on you because of what, I was so pleased with what I saw at the meeting. I was, you know, I thought that it was still in this, I'm sorry, I thought that it was still in the stages of floundering for a structure and those kind of things, and had no real idea that they were going to be as organized as they were. So that's why I sort of put it on the agenda now. And so I'm sorry for the confusion.
Sue?
Pat, is there a difference though, like when you're attending the meetings now, are you, quote, at the table and, you know what I mean? Like, is there a difference?
I didn't know there would be until I got to the meeting when I saw all these nice little name tags up there, and Essex doesn't have a name tag because we're not on there, but they were very gracious. They let me talk, and I don't think that they would have stopped me from talking even if I had started talking without being recognized. I had a few points to make. I think I made the points, and I shut up and listened very attentively to other people. But yeah, well, Irene was there. She can verify.
Irene?
And to answer your question, Sue, I would say it absolutely matters who's at the table, because the 3 points that to me were most eye-opening, 2 of which I mentioned in my memo, none of those 3 are included in the minutes. And that gives me huge pause. Because what recourse do I have as a member of the audience to tell them what should have been in their minutes? I don't think I have any. And that's the kind of information, because those meetings are not being videotaped at all. I think it's a huge loss for those of us who cannot attend the meetings or might not, or might just be relying on minutes to give us the kernels of wisdom that come out of it.
Okay. And I'm still concerned about Pat's plate being very full and not doing this. And I understand we need to get somebody on there, but if Pat's willing to attend those and speak up until we can come back on the 15th, maybe come up with a process to look at other candidates with hopefully some diverse views, I prefer that personally, but we have a motion on the table. Yes.
Yeah, can we come back, I guess maybe come back to the question of what do we mean by interim? I mean, are we saying that we want Pat to go to the next meeting, but or are we going to immediately after this, or as soon as possible, start advertising for folks to offer themselves up to be on this committee? Or
yeah, I think we need to find out what it is, what description we want to have out there in the advertisement, and get that out there quickly. And maybe we can have a draft of that at our 15th meeting to see what that would look like. And if for the interim, even though Pat's not on the committee, if he would agree to continue to go and speak, maybe that would move us forward to where we're trying to get to.
And you know, Irene is correct. The next regularly scheduled meeting is the last Wednesday of the month. You will have had one meeting before then, and then shortly thereafter, I think was the 1st of June or 3rd of June or something, another meeting. So I will have had my 2 meetings as a interested party, and would probably say the same thing about making sure that we had someone at the seat, because I firmly believe that that's the right thing to do. Who it is that you want there is up to you.
Andy?
Sorry. Given that it's quite possible that it may take us more than 1 or 2 meetings to sort out who we might select if we were to offer this out to the public, given that folks may not be able to come to a meeting to be interviewed immediately, I would reconsider the proposed friendly amendment to add the word interim, so that Pat could freely participate in more than just one more meeting. Should it take that much longer for us to identify a suitable candidate?
Okay. Who seconded it? Mike. So it's up to you to say if you're okay with that. Of the amendment to say it's interim, for Pat to be on it, so he would be on it immediately.
He's interim anyway. I don't know why we're getting our knickers in a bunch about this. I just don't. I'm sorry.
It's interim in your view because when he retires, he's gone. I think
He's given us a date specific.
and I think the other members are saying they'd like to have another candidate there before Pat retires.
And I'm on the record twice as saying that I am 100% behind that idea.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Okay.
It's a great idea.
Okay. So then you're okay with that amendment? Great.
Fine.
It needs to be confirmed by the
Fine.
seconder, right?
Fine.
That's the rule.
See what you said?
Obvious or not? Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. And what we're voting on is to have Pat as the interim, and we're going to select another candidate starting at our May 15th meeting. We're going to look at begin the process. Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Hey, we did that one. Wow. Yes, ma'am.
It's a joint survey.
Joint survey committee.
Joint survey committee.
What I said was Public Safety Joint Study Committee. That's what I said.
That's what it is.
That's what it
That's
is.
the official
I just
term. Yeah.
didn't think anybody would know what that is.
Okay, that didn't take long.
Wait, is it survey or study?
It's survey.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
survey.
Yes, Barbara.
Max, could I just offer reiteration that as I understood it, what was both written and otherwise did not necessarily preclude you appointing somebody else from the staff or
Absolutely. Right.
the public was not the only
Correct.
option.
That's right.
Correct.
That's correct.
Yep. Yep. Good. Thanks for clarification. Okay. We're moving on to 5I. That's participation in the Beamers D. Doug, do we need an executive session to discuss this?
We do not. We do not feel the need for an executive session, but we asterisked it in case the board felt the need to discuss things in executive session. We're fine going ahead and in
Okay,
open.
let's see how far we can get without going into executive.
Sure.
That's okay with everybody?
Sure.
Great, thank you. So the issue is whether or not the select board will authorize non-union sworn police officers to join the Beamers D retirement plan. As you know, in the recently approved union contract, we authorized, or one of the deals was to allow officers to go into the Beamers D plan, which is a little bit different from our current C plan. It is only available to sworn police officers. But that language in the contract also limits it just to union members. So we have a number of officers higher in the ranks who are sworn police officers, but because they are not in the union, they are not allowed to join Beamers D, and some of them have expressed an interest in doing so. So in order to allow them to do that, the select board needs to authorize non-union sworn police officers the ability to join Beamers D should they so choose. As part of the union contract, the agreement was in exchange for the town's increased contribution, which the Beamers D plan does require as an increased contribution. The officers would forego a step movement in the year that they moved into Beamers. So in keeping with that, we would recommend that in allowing the non-sworn police officers that we would have the same quid pro quo of them foregoing the equivalent of what their step would be. In this case, it would be a 1% raise that they would forego. In exchange, it would cost the town 1.85% more in an increased retirement contribution. So there would be a minor increase to the town. Currently, there are 5 officers, I believe, that fall into this category: the chief, a couple of the 2 captains, and I think we currently have 2 lieutenants. All other sworn police officers are members of the union. These folks are out because of their supervisory nature. So it's estimated it would cost approximately $4,800 a year to cover all 5 of those should they choose to make that switch. So management is recommending the Select Board authorize the VEMR's Plan D for all Town of Essex sworn police officers, whether in the union or not. And it's not written here. I believe your action is all that's needed, but authorize also the manager to execute whatever documents may be necessary. Would be nice.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Any questions for Doug on this? Seems pretty straightforward, and it's the cost of $4,800 per year. It's not just the 1 year time. They work hard on our behalf. Okay. I would entertain a motion, Irene. Thank you.
I move that the Select Board authorize the VEMR's Plan D for all Town of Essex sworn police officers and authorize the town manager to sign such agreement.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mike. Okay,
Yep.
I'll give it to Mike. Any further discussion on having the VEMR's Plan D for all Town of Essex sworn police officers? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right,
Thank
now
you.
we're moving on to the minutes of Select Board minutes of April 17th, 2017. Do I have a motion?
I would move approval of the Select Board minutes of April 17th, 2017 with Select Board member corrections.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Let's start on page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Irene?
I also provided handouts to people of the other things I've given to Sam. If you want me to go over those, I will. I had corrections on 2 because there was no tie-in between what Mr. St. James said and my reference to the Cemetery Commission. So if you don't agree with those changes, please let me know.
Wait a minute. So,
Back on page 2, what I just handed out were my corrections to page 2 that I provided to Sam.
I got page 5.
I only got page 5.
Let's see page
So,
2.
the very top block on the handout that I just gave you
Oh.
is from page 2,
Oh.
and it's the 85, 86, 87 lines. And I didn't want to just read those off because they're extensive. But I can read them off if you'd like,
Yeah.
for the record. I would change lines 85 to 87 to read, with regard to the vacancy on the Cemetery Commission that Mr. St. James suggested was, quote, not too lively, end quote, comma, Mrs. Renner wanted to be sure that the public knew that the Cemetery Commission is a very active committee with various interesting topics, such as green burials, legislation in the works in Montpelier this week.
Okay. Did you have a page 3 that you needed to go over?
On page 3, I'll just add on page 1, on line 119, please. At the very end, equity, should say equity in payment. Mr. Nye went on to say that several times, that he was talking about the money people paid for their hauling. On line 123 at the end, rather than residences per square mile, I'd like to say housing density. So that's what you're talking about with developments themselves.
Do you have something on 4?
And then on page 5 would be the next one. Are we ready together?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On page 5, I have changes on line 233, 236, and 240, and you'll see those at the bottom of the page that I handed out. And again, it's easier, I think, to show these than to try to read them off. And in the middle of the sheet that I handed out are the April 3rd minutes to which these refer. What we were actually doing was inserting line 33 into 35 instead of switching the lines. So hopefully those are clear, but I'd be glad to entertain any questions on those. Thank you.
Okay. Page 6. Irene?
So 255, I'm still Ms. Last I checked. And the first word on 256, instead of managed, would be audited. Who audited the parade money? So, thanks.
Page 7.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of the Select Board minutes of April 17, 2017 with corrections, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Move on to the minutes of April 11th, 2017. Do I have a motion?
I would move approval of the April 11th minutes of the joint meeting with the trustees with Select Board member corrections. And again, I have some that I can hand out if we could just hold off for a second.
Okay.
Only because I think it's easier to see them than it is to. And I'm not sure who gets these, whether it's Sam. Does Pat take those, or does Marianne get them, or how does that work?
You mean for the village side?
I don't know who's going to make the corrections, but I'll just read them off. How's
Okay.
that?
I'm gonna give these to Sam.
Okay, let's start on page 1.
For us.
Irene?
At the end of line 29, I would add a comma rather than a period. Per Select Board conversations in the past about the importance of having data to back up such decisions.
Okay. You have something at 35 you want to say?
Please. I looked at the tape, and it was a governmental body, not party.
Okay. Page 2.
I have
Hi.
something.
Oh, sorry.
On line 42, I know the agenda item was continue with municipal manager model, but the prompt that we got from George was, what were our thoughts on consolidation? And I think that that's, because all the comments that go beneath this section were really more along the lines of what were our thoughts on consolidation versus specifically.
Okay, so 42 you're saying cross out what's there and say
42.
thoughts on consolidation?
Yes.
Okay. See that, Sam? On line 42?
On row 42, where it's in italics, which was the header for this topic, it says continue with municipal manager model, and really the prompt and all the topics that are brought up, starting right underneath that, are really around thoughts in general about the consolidation.
Put a slash next to model and do consolidation?
No, I think you slash the whole thing on
Yeah.
line 42, if
Oh,
I understand correctly.
sorry.
So, and say thoughts on consolidation.
Input on consolidation.
Thoughts on consolidation or just consolidation?
Either input on consolidation or thoughts on consolidation. That was the prompt
And
that
di-
we,
All of those?
On just line 42.
just line 42,
Yeah.
because that's the header for everything that goes all the way to line 109.
Right, yeah, just,
I grew a brain I shouldn't have, I'm sorry.
anything else on 1? Okay, page 2. Irene?
So Sue, correct me if I'm wrong, but on 86, I believe you were talking about support staff going across rather than in two separate locations. You talked about the municipal manager working across, but you also wanted him to have support staff that worked across the two municipalities.
Yeah, I mean, really
from
my
what I saw.
comments were around that, not getting stuck on the idea of having a single municipal manager, but possibly that could be something that's shared from a role perspective, as long as it still had broad across the municipality's responsibility.
So are you okay with changing in to across on 86? Does that capture that?
I don't see how.
You see that? Where she's talking about, Sue?
Municipal manager should have one office with support staff in the 2 separate locations.
I could have sworn that's what you said.
That's what we have now. We have staff at each location.
You're suggesting replacing the word in with what?
Across, because you talked about the manager being across, and then
Yeah.
him having an assistant that works
I'm okay
across
with that.
purposes.
Yep.
Is that what you said?
Well, that's what I saw in the video.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't remember what I said 10 minutes ago.
Page 3. Irene?
So I think you have a copy of this as well on the back of the thing I just handed out.
Just give
On line 100. I would insert the word equitable before representation at the end of that sentence. And then I would insert something to the effect of, this was not the case in 2016 on the RGSC or in 2006 on the MTF.
Starting a lot.
And then on 108 to 109, I would say, as of tonight, some metrics in the form of staff comments were distributed.
Where would that go?
That's on 108, 109, and that's on the sheets that I handed out.
Oh, yeah, must have
Did you
given
not
me
get them?
that.
Sorry.
That's the old one. Is this one? Is it this one?
There you go. So it now says, as of tonight, some metrics in the form of staff comments were distributed.
I don't know, that kind of changes that completely, doesn't it?
Right, because it didn't, she wasn't capturing what I said. I was acknowledging that although I'd spoken at the beginning of the meeting that there were no metrics, Doug then handed out metrics that he had gathered. And so I was explaining to people, now we've got some metrics.
Meeting on April 11th, 2017 with corrections, signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Irene
I made the
moved,
motion.
and I think Sue did it. Because Mike did the second on the first set of minutes, right? And I think Sue got the second one.
Are you
Is that
okay
right?
with that, Sue? Are you
I'm
okay
with that.
seconding
I don't
it?
actually think I did, but I'm okay with it. I did the first set of minutes. I don't know that. Maybe there wasn't a second on the second set of minutes.
Who wants to?
Sure.
Max said Mike.
All right, we'll give it a mic. Nice stand-up guy. All right. So, do I have a motion on the consent agenda?
I would move approval of the consent agenda with select board member comments.
Thank you, Irene. Who's going to second this one?
I will second this one.
Ooh, Andy almost did, but Sue got it. Okay, so Sue's
I
the
knew.
seconder. All right, comments. Not a whole lot in there, though. Irene?
So I would just add, per our conversation earlier, that for our meeting schedule and events, could we put appointing the review committee members there as well as anything related to candidates for the JSC position?
Yeah, and I don't think we need to have the discussion about the minutes listed on there. I think the intent, if I recall, was to kind of have a heads up on the radar items, the things that are on the back burner, but we just want to see them here and know that what's on the burner. Is that,
Yeah,
was that the intent?
I was envisioning that there would be like a parking lot list of topics outside of the grid for the meetings, but ones that we know. I think either Doug or Pat referenced that there is a list that's being maintained.
Yeah.
Like, let's put it on the same sheet so that we know that we can take it out of our head because it's on the sheet.
And how about if we go just one step further and say, from that list, if they know when it's going to be on our
Sure.
agenda and it's within this time window, would be great.
Sure.
Great to see it in the
Sure.
box.
But minutes definitely don't need to be on there.
Yeah. 'cause
Just
that's the,
Yeah, this, just,
expect those.
okay, any other comments on, yes, Sue?
I just had a question on page 2 of the check warrants. About a third of the way down, Essex Junction School District.
Yeah, we collect the money for the school,
We
the taxes.
collect the money for the
The-
school, but this is an amount paid, right?
Yeah, we collect it, and then, well, I'll let Doug speak, sorry, I'll let Doug speak to that one. Or ask Doug to speak.
Okay, for the pilot agreement.
Yeah.
That's, it's a special, payment in lieu of taxes that we have. I believe that's a solar generating facility. And so the agreement was that the 3 municipalities, which was the Essex Junction School, the village, and the town, would split that revenue on the same basis as their respective tax rates that year. So we get the check in total from the property owner, and then we divvy it up and send the village and the village school their share.
Okay, so the entire amount comes into the town, is what you're saying?
Correct.
And then this is, so would I see a like this is going to the school district, where's the one going to the village?
You should either see that here or they've done that through an inter-fund transfer, because they're on our books now.
Any other comments on the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, okay, motion passes 5-0. Pat, we don't need an executive session, we did it in open meeting. Great. Okay, then, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And who wants a second? Irene?
Second.
Sue does, okay, all those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we're out of here.
So before we go, there's one license second class.
The vapes one?
Yeah, the vapes one, right there. And then, question for you, Doug, the outside liquor one, there isn't a spot to sign.
This is their first one, right? So all you've got is for the clerk to sign?
Yes.
Right, so this is their first one. I think next year's will come from the state, and then it will have for all of you.
Okay. And yeah, these are the ones for you.